Montana Territory, 1886. The baby came into the world on the coldest night of winter, when the wind's teeth bit through log walls and the darkness seemed a living thing. Sarah Coulter gripped the bedposts and screamed once more as Martha Wheeler, the midwife who had delivered every child in Whitetail Creek for 20 years, worked with practiced hands. "I see the head," Martha said, her voice steady as the mountains. "One more push, Sarah, just one more." Outside, Thomas Coulter paced the porch of their homestead, breath clouding before him like ghosts. 5 years they'd been trying, 5 years of hope withering to dust in Sarah's womb. The snow fell in thick curtains around the cabin, isolating them from the scattered homes of other settlers. In the distance, the shadow of the mountains where the Blackfoot tribe kept to themselves. The cry that split the night was thin but strong. Thomas stopped mid-step, hat clutched against his chest. Inside, Martha cleaned the infant while Sarah collapsed against sweat-soaked pillows. "A boy," Martha announced, wrapping him in the quilt Sarah had spent months stitching together from scraps of Thomas's old shirts and her wedding dress, healthy as a young colt. But when Martha placed the child in Sarah's arms, the new mother's smile faltered. "His eyes," she whispered. Martha leaned closer. The baby's eyes were open and usual for a newborn and black as river stones beneath a full moon, not the cloudy blue of most babies, but deep, endless black that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. "Raven eyes," Martha said softly. "I've never seen the like." Thomas burst through the door, snow melting on his shoulders. His face, weathered by sun and wind and worry, broke into a hesitant smile. "A boy?" he asked, voice catching. Sarah nodded, but something in her expression made him cross the room in 3 strides. When he looked down at his son, the joy in his face dimmed, replaced by something like wonder, like fear. "What's wrong with him?" Thomas asked, the question hanging in the air like gunsmoke. "Nothing's wrong," Martha said firmly. "He's just ... different." Word spread through Whitetail Creek like wildfire through summer grass. By morning, every soul in the settlement knew of the Coulter boy with eyes black as sin or salvation, depending on who you asked. By afternoon, curious visitors arrived bearing gifts and barely concealed curiosity. Thomas stood at the door, accepting congratulations with a nod, watching the visitors' faces as they peered into the cradle. Always the same surprise. Sometimes poorly masked revulsion, sometimes awe. The Reverend came with his Bible and a tight smile, making the sign of the cross before he'd even crossed the threshold. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said, not quite meeting Thomas's eyes. It was. On the 3rd day that the widow came, she appeared at the edge of the property like she'd risen from the earth itself. Her face was a map of years, deep lines carved by wind and grief. Her silver hair hung in 2 long braids beneath a worn wool shawl. She didn't knock, didn't call out, she simply stood in the yard waiting. Thomas saw her from the window and felt a chill deeper than the winter cold. "Sarah," he called softly, "there's a Blackfoot woman outside." Sarah came to stand beside him, the baby clutched to her chest. "What does she want?" "I don't know." Thomas took his rifle from above the door, not to threaten, but because a man didn't walk into uncertainty in this territory without protection, and stepped onto the porch. "Can I help you?" he called. The old woman's eyes didn't move to the rifle. They remained fixed on the bundle in Sarah's arms, visible through the window. "I have come to see the child," she said, her English accented but clear. Thomas hesitated, glancing back at Sarah, who stood frozen in the doorway. "My name is Singing Bird," the woman continued. "I have walked for days to see him." "How did you know?" Sarah asked, stepping forward despite Thomas's outstretched hand trying to hold her back. "I dreamed," Singing Bird said simply. "I dreamed of his coming." Something in her voice made Thomas lower his rifle. He had known Blackfoot before, had traded with them, had once been treated for fever by one of their healers when no white doctor was near. He had never feared them the way some settlers did. Still, the old woman's certainty unsettled him. "You've come a long way for nothing," he said. "He's just a baby. Our baby." Singing Bird shook her head slowly. "Not just a baby," she said. "He's the one my tribe buried in silence 100 years ago." The wind picked up, driving snow between them like a curtain momentarily drawn. When it cleared, Sarah had stepped fully onto the porch, the baby cradled against her. Something pulled her forward, curiosity or destiny. She couldn't have said which. "What do you mean?" she asked. Singing Bird's eyes dark like the baby's but clouded with age, filled with tears. "May I?" she asked, holding out gnarled hands. Thomas. It started to object, but Sarah was already moving. Guided by an instinct beyond reason, she placed her son in the old woman's arms. Singing Bird looked down at the infant, her breath catching. The baby, who had fussed constantly since birth, grew suddenly still, his raven eyes fixed on the old woman's face with an intensity that seemed impossible for a newborn. A single tear tracked down Singing Bird's weathered cheek. "Swift Arrow," she whispered. "You have returned." Chapter 2. Thomas's hand closed around the stock of his rifle, knuckles white. "Give me back my son," he said, voice low as distant thunder. Singing Bird made no move to return the child, her weathered fingers tracing the contours of the baby's face with a reverence that stilled Sarah's instinct to snatch him away. "I do not claim him," the old woman said. eyes never leaving the infant. The spirits have given him to you, but you must understand what walks in his skin. The baby cooed sound like water over stones, reaching up with tiny fingers toward Singing Bird's face. Sarah stepped forward, snow soaking through the thin fabric of her house slippers. Come inside, she said, the words falling from her mouth before she could consider them. Please. Thomas shot her a look sharp as flint. Sarah, it's too cold for the baby, she said, meeting her husband's eyes with a conviction that surprised them both, and I need to know. The cabin felt smaller with Singing Bird seated at their table, her presence somehow larger than her bent frame suggested. Thomas stood by the door, rifle still in hand, while Sarah sat across from the old woman, who held the baby with the ease of someone who had cradled many children. Who was Swift Arrow? Sarah asked, the name unfamiliar on her tongue. Singing Bird looked up, the firelight deepening the lines of her face into shadow valleys. He was my husband's grandfather, a medicine man of great power among the Blackfoot, a bridge between worlds. What do you mean? Buried in silence, Thomas asked, suspicion edging his words. Singing Bird was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as if reading stories written in smoke. When I was a girl, my grandmother told me of Swift Arrow's death. He was killed by white trappers who feared his medicine. They cut out his tongue so his spirit could not speak curses against them. Our people found him and buried him with ceremony, but without the death songs. In silence, so his spirit might find its own path back. Sarah shivered despite the fire's warmth. But that's just a story. All truth begins as story, Singing Bird replied. Look at your son's eyes, the color of ravens, who carry messages between this world and the next. Swift Arrow had such eyes. It was said he could see what others could not. Thomas pushed himself away from the wall. This is nonsense. My boy's just got dark eyes is all. Why did you come here? Sarah asked, ignoring her husband's dismissal. What do you want with our son? To warn you, Singing Bird said simply, and to help, if you will allow it. Warn us of what? Thomas demanded. There are those among my people who have waited for Swift Arrow's return, who believe his spirit would come back when most needed. She looked down at the baby, who had fallen asleep in her arms. But there are others who will fear him, who will see his return as a sign of coming conflict. The fire popped, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Outside, the wind moaned around the eaves like a woman in mourning. My son is just a baby, Sarah whispered. He's not your medicine man. Singing Bird nodded slowly. Perhaps the resemblance is nothing more than shadow and memory. But the dreams that led me here were strong, and I am too old for such a journey without cause. She extended the sleeping child to Sarah, who took him with trembling hands. Whether you believe or not, others will see what I have seen. You should prepare. Thomas moved to stand behind Sarah's chair, one hand on her shoulder. Prepare for what? For those who would use him, or harm him. Singing Bird reached into the pouch at her waist and withdrew something wrapped in soft buckskin. This belonged to Swift Arrow. It should be with the child. She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a small carving of a raven in flight, fashioned from black stone that caught the light strangely, seeming to hold it rather than reflect it. Sarah gasped softly. The stone was the exact color of her son's eyes. I cannot take this, Sarah said, though her hand moved of its own accord toward the talisman. It is not for you. It is for him. It will protect him when the time comes. Singing Bird pressed the carving into Sarah's palm and closed her fingers around it. Keep it near him always. Thomas made a sound of frustration. We don't hold with Indian superstitions. Singing Bird looked up at him, her gaze unflinching. What you believe matters less than what is. The stone knows its purpose. Outside, a horse nickered, followed by the crunch of boots on snow. A moment later, a sharp knock at the door made them all start. Colter, you in there? It was Sheriff Wilson's voice. Got some folks out here looking for a Blackfoot woman. Say she's wandered off from their reservation. Thomas glanced from Singing Bird to the door, conflict written across his features. Sarah clutched the baby closer, the stone raven digging into her palm. She came to see our boy, Thomas called back. Nothing more. A pause. These men say she's addled in the head, been talking crazy about spirits and such. Best if they take her back where she belongs. Singing Bird stood, drawing her shawl around her shoulders. It begins already, she said softly. They will try to keep me from him, to prevent what must come. And what must come? Sarah asked, rising to her feet. Balance, Singing Bird replied. Truth. The medicine that heals old wounds. Thomas stepped to the door but paused with his hand on the latch. He looked back at Singing Bird, measuring her with his gaze. These men, are they your people? Singing Bird's smile was bitter as winter berries. They wear the skin of my people. Their hearts beat to another drum. The knock came again, harder. This time, Colter, you opening up or what? Thomas made his decision in the space between heartbeats. There's a root cellar under the rug by the pantry. It ain't much, but thank you, Singing Bird said, already moving toward the indicated spot. Remember what I have told you. The boy has two paths before him. Which one he walks depends on what you teach him. As Thomas pulled back the rug and revealed the trap door, Sarah found her voice. Will you come back? Singing Bird paused at the edge of the cellar, her eyes finding the baby one last time. When he needs me, I will know. Then she was gone, descending into the earth beneath their home, the trapdoor closing like a secret kept. Thomas replaced the rug just as another round of knocking shook the cabin door. Coming, he called, straightening his shirt and giving Sarah a look that said, "Say nothing." She nodded, clutching both baby and Stone Raven to her chest as Thomas went to face the men at their door. In her arms the child opened his eyes, black as midnight, old as memory. Chapter 3. 7 years passed like water through cupped hands. The boy they named Daniel grew tall and straight as a young pine, his raven eyes unchanged, still black as midnight, still seeing things others could not. Sarah kept the stone carving on a leather cord around his neck, beneath his shirts where curious townspeople wouldn't notice. Thomas had convinced the men at their door that night, 2 Blackfoot men in government-issued clothes and a white Indian agent with cold eyes, that no one was there but his family. They'd searched half-heartedly, more interested in the whiskey Thomas offered than finding an old woman they claimed had dangerous ideas. By morning, Singing Bird was gone from the root cellar, vanished like mist, though Daniel sometimes spoke of dreams where an old woman sang to him in a language he shouldn't know. Spring came early that 7th year. The snow retreating up the mountainsides by mid-March. Daniel sat cross-legged in the meadow behind their cabin, watching a beetle make its laborious way across the newly green grass. His fingers absently traced the outline of the raven carving beneath his shirt. "Daniel," Sarah called from the porch. "Time to come in." He didn't answer, his attention fixed on something beyond the tree line. Sarah shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun, following his gaze. There was nothing there but shadow and pine. "Daniel Coulter, you answer when I call." He turned then, his face solemn in a way that never failed to unsettle her. "They're coming," he said simply. "Who's coming?" Sarah asked, scanning the empty land around them. Daniel shrugged, the gesture oddly adult. "The men with angry hearts." Thomas returned from town an hour later, his wagon loaded with supplies for spring planting. His face was set in hard lines. Sarah recognized the look he wore when trouble was brewing. "What is it?" she asked as he unloaded sacks of seed. "Talk in town," he said, voice low enough that Daniel, playing with carved wooden horses nearby, wouldn't hear. "Indian troubles up north. Some kind of religious movement spreading through the tribes. Government's nervous." Sarah felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the spring breeze. "What kind of movement?" Thomas glanced at Daniel. "They call it the ghost dance. Supposed to bring back the old ways, maybe even the dead. Some say it'll drive out the white man." He set down a crate, with more force than necessary. "Sheriff says the reservation's been stirred up for months." Singing Bird's name came up. The wooden horse in Daniel's hand clattered to the floor. He looked up at them, eyes wide and knowing. "She's in danger," he said. Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances. This was not the first time their son had known things he shouldn't. Not the first time his words had carried weight beyond his years. "No one's talking about that," Thomas said firmly. "Just grown-up business." Daniel shook his head, fingers finding the hidden raven at his throat. "They want to stop her singing." Like before. That night, Sarah woke to find Daniel's bed empty, his coat and boots gone. She shook Thomas awake, panic rising in her throat like floodwater. "He's gone to find her," she said, pulling on her dress with trembling hands. They found him halfway up the ridge that separated their homestead from the mountains beyond. Walking with purpose through the moonlight, his small form a silhouette against the silver-washed rocks, Thomas's voice echoed across the night-still landscape. "Stop right there, boy." Daniel turned, his face tear-streaked. "She's calling me, Pa. She needs help." Thomas scooped him up, holding tight even as the boy struggled. "You can't go wandering in the night. There's wolves, mountain lions. They won't hurt me," Daniel said with absolute certainty. "The ravens watch over me." As if summoned by his words, a large black bird landed on a nearby boulder, its eyes gleaming in the moonlight. Another joined it, then another, until 7 ravens perched in silent witness around them. Sarah clutched Thomas's arm. "Thomas," she whispered. "It's just birds," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. Daniel went still in his father's arms, looking at something beyond them. "She's here," he said. They turned to find Singing Bird standing where there had been only shadow moments before. 7 years had bent her further, her face more deeply lined, but her eyes remained sharp as flint. She wore ceremonial dress buckskin adorned with beads and quills, her silver hair braided with feathers. "The time has come," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness. "They have found me, and soon they will come for him." "Who?" Thomas demanded, setting Daniel down but keeping a hand on his shoulder. "Men who fear what they cannot understand, who would rather destroy than learn." Singing Bird's gaze moved to Daniel. "The stone has protected you, but it is not enough now." Daniel nodded as if they were continuing a conversation long in progress. "I've been practicing," he said. "Practicing what?" Sarah asked, dread pooling in her stomach. In answer, Daniel closed his eyes. The ravens took flight, circling above their heads, in a pattern too orderly for chance. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and sweetgrass, though neither grew nearby. "What is this?" Thomas whispered, his hand moving instinctively toward the pistol at his hip. "The medicine," Singing Bird said. "Swift arrows, gift, reborn, the power to heal the divide between worlds." A distant sound carried on the night air horses, many of them, approaching fast from the direction of town. "They followed me," Singing Bird said, sorrow deepening the lines of her face. "I led them to him." Chapter 4. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, hoofbeats like war drums against the soft spring earth. Thomas pushed Daniel behind him toward Sarah, drawing his pistol with practiced ease. "Get back to the house," he said, voice tight as bowstring. "There's no time." Singing Bird said. Her gnarled fingers found Daniel's shoulder. "Come, child, the circle must be completed." Before Thomas could object, the old woman led Daniel to a flat stretch of ground bathed in moonlight. With surprising quickness, she used her walking stick to trace a wide circle in the dirt. The ravens descended, settling at 7 points around the perimeter like sentinels. Sarah started forward, maternal instinct warring with something deeper, knowing beyond reason that whispered, "Watch, wait, what are you doing?" Thomas demanded, eyes darting between the approaching riders and his son. "What should have been done a century ago," Singing Bird replied. The healing was interrupted, the story left unfinished. Daniel stood in the center of the circle, small yet somehow immense, his eyes reflecting starlight. "I remember," he said, his voice changing, deepening, as if another spoke through him. "I remember the silence of my burial." The riders crested the ridge, a dozen men, some in army uniforms, others in the clothes of Indian police. At their head rode the Indian agent Thomas recognized from 7 years before, his face grim beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Stop right there," the agent called, raising a hand to halt his men. "Step away from the boy, Singing Bird. Your ghost dance nonsense ends tonight." Singing Bird didn't turn, continuing to whisper instructions to Daniel. The boy nodded, reaching beneath his nightshirt to pull out the raven carving. It caught the moonlight strangely, seeming to absorb rather than reflect it. "That's an order," the agent shouted, dismounting. Several men followed, rifles ready. Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between the approaching men and his family. "This is my land," he called. "My boy, whatever business you have with the old woman can wait till morning." The agent's face hardened. "This isn't about property rights, Coulter. This is about sedition. That woman has been traveling between reservations, spreading dangerous ideas about Indian resurrection and the end of white authority, and now she's involving your son in her rituals." "He's just a child," Sarah said, finding her voice at last. "Children are impressionable," the agent replied, "especially half-breeds." Thomas's gun hand twitched. "My son is no half-breed. Then why does he wear tribal fetishes? Why do the Indians call him the returned one?" The agent gestured to his men. "Detain the woman. We'll sort this out at the fort." As 2 soldiers stepped forward, Daniel raised the stone raven above his head. The night air went suddenly still, as if the world itself held its breath. When he spoke, the words were Blackfoot, flowing from his lips with the certainty of long practice. "What's he saying?" Thomas asked, glancing at Singing Bird. "The truth," she replied. "He speaks the story that was silenced." The ravens took flight, circling overhead in a living vortex of black wings. The soldiers hesitated, unnerved. "Arrest them both," the agent ordered, drawing his own sidearm. Now, what happened next would be told and retold across the territory for generations, growing with each telling until it became legend. Some would say the boy transformed into a raven before their eyes. Others would claim the earth opened beneath the soldiers' feet. The Indian police would later report that a sudden wind knocked them from their horses, and when they rose, the old woman and the boy were gone. The truth was both simpler and more profound. Daniel lowered the stone raven and stepped forward, out of the circle, walking with deliberate steps toward the armed men. In the moonlight, his eyes seemed to hold all the darkness of the universe. "I know you," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent night. "I know your fear." He reached the agent, who stood frozen, gun half raised. Daniel looked up at him without flinching. "Swift Arrow forgives you," he said. "Your grandfather who held the knife." The agent's face drained of color. His gun hand trembled. "What did you say?" "Your grandfather took his voice but couldn't take his spirit. The circle remains unbroken." Daniel reached out, touching the man's hand. "The hatred stops with you." Behind them, Sarah gasped as understanding bloomed. The agent, his features suddenly familiar in the revealing moonlight, bore the unmistakable. This resemblance to the trappers who had settled the territory 3 generations back. "How could you know?" the agent whispered. "That story died with my grandfather." "Nothing dies if it's remembered," Daniel said. "Swift Arrow remembers. I remember." The agent's gun lowered slowly. Around them, the soldiers and Indian police watched. In wary silence, caught in the gravity of a moment they couldn't comprehend but instinctively recognized as sacred. Singing Bird approached, her steps steady despite her age. "The medicine was never meant for war," she said. "It was for healing, for remembering what was forgotten." The wind rose again, carrying the scent of sage and pine. Above them, the ravens called not the harsh calls of scavengers but something like song, like prayer.